Welcome to the Bare Metal Cyber CISSP Prepcast. This series helps you prepare for the ISC² CISSP exam with focused explanations and practical context. In this episode, we are going to explore session management and timeout policies. These are critical pieces of any access control framework, and they play a major role in preventing unauthorized access, protecting user data, and maintaining secure system operations. For students preparing for the ISC² CISSP exam, this topic often comes up in questions that relate to authentication sessions, browser security, and access control. So it is important to understand not only what session management is, but why timeout policies matter, how they work together, and how to implement them effectively. Let us begin by defining what we mean by session management. A session is the time frame during which a user interacts with a system, application, or service after they have authenticated. That session begins when they log in and continues until they either log out or the system ends the session based on a timeout or other criteria. Session management refers to how that period of time is handled. It includes how the session is created, how it is maintained, how it is tracked, and ultimately how it is securely terminated. If session management is not handled correctly, serious vulnerabilities can be introduced. For example, if a session remains open and active on a device that has been left unattended, an unauthorized person could hijack that session and gain access to sensitive systems. Similarly, if a session token is not protected or is reused across systems, it could be intercepted and exploited by an attacker. Secure session management prevents these kinds of issues by carefully defining how long sessions last, how they are tracked, and what happens when inactivity is detected. One of the most common and effective tools within session management is the timeout policy. A timeout policy dictates how long a session can remain active before it is automatically terminated due to inactivity. This is especially important in environments where users may forget to log out, such as shared workstations, public terminals, or remote access sessions. Timeout policies ensure that even if a user leaves a session open, the system will eventually close it and require reauthentication. There are many reasons why timeout policies are considered a security best practice. First and foremost, they reduce the risk of session hijacking. If an attacker gains physical access to an unattended workstation, or is able to access a remote desktop session that was left open, a timeout policy limits how long that session remains available. The shorter the timeout period, the smaller the window of opportunity for that attack. Timeout policies also support compliance. Many regulatory frameworks, including the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, the Payment Card Industry Data Security Standard, and the General Data Protection Regulation, require organizations to implement session timeout controls for systems that process sensitive or regulated data. Being able to show that your systems automatically end inactive sessions is often a key audit requirement. There is also a user accountability aspect to timeout policies. When users are required to reauthenticate after a timeout, it reinforces secure habits and emphasizes that access to systems is a controlled and monitored process. It helps create a culture of security awareness and ensures that only active, verified users are able to interact with organizational systems. Now let us talk about how to implement effective session management in practice. It begins with policy. Your organization should have a written policy that outlines how sessions are created, how long they can remain active, how inactivity is measured, and how sessions should be terminated. This policy should apply consistently across applications, services, and platforms, with appropriate adjustments for risk level and usage patterns. For example, a financial application that allows access to sensitive customer data might have a timeout policy of 5 minutes. That means if there is no activity for 5 minutes, the user is automatically logged out. In contrast, a general informational application with no sensitive data might allow 20 or 30 minutes of inactivity. The key is to balance security with usability, making sure that timeout settings are appropriate for the level of risk involved. From a technical standpoint, sessions are usually managed through session tokens or session identifiers. These are unique values generated when the session is created, and they are used to track the user's interactions with the system. It is critical that these session identifiers are kept secure. They should be random, difficult to guess, and never exposed in URLs. They should also be stored securely in session cookies that are encrypted and transmitted over secure channels like Hypertext Transfer Protocol Secure. Timeout enforcement is typically implemented on the server side. That means the server tracks how long it has been since the user's last activity and ends the session after the defined threshold is reached. In some cases, this can also be enforced on the client side using browser scripts or application timers. However, server-side enforcement is generally more reliable and secure because it cannot be bypassed by modifying client settings. Let us now shift our attention to the security controls that support strong session management. These include detailed logging and monitoring of session activities. Every time a session is created, maintained, or terminated, that event should be recorded in the system logs. If a session is terminated due to timeout, that should be noted. If a session ends because of user logout or administrative action, that should be noted as well. These logs are essential for detecting unusual behavior, auditing access, and investigating security incidents. In addition to logging, session management should be integrated with multi-factor authentication. This means that users should be required to verify their identity using more than one factor, such as a password and a code sent to their mobile device, especially when accessing sensitive systems or after a timeout period. This helps prevent unauthorized users from taking over a session that has just been timed out and restarted. Secure storage of session data is also essential. Whether that data is stored in memory, in cookies, or in server-side databases, it must be protected from tampering and unauthorized access. Encryption should be used wherever possible to protect session tokens and identifiers both in transit and at rest. Regular vulnerability assessments and penetration testing are also important. These tests help identify flaws in how sessions are managed, including issues like session fixation, session reuse, or weak session identifiers. If these problems are not addressed, attackers may be able to hijack sessions or bypass timeout controls altogether. Now let us turn to timeout policies themselves. These should be carefully designed based on the sensitivity of the system and the nature of user interactions. For highly sensitive systems, such as administrative portals, databases, or cloud consoles, timeouts of 5 to 10 minutes are common. For lower-risk systems, 20 or 30 minutes might be acceptable. The key is to base your timeout policies on risk, not convenience. Timeout messages should also be user-friendly and informative. When a session ends, the user should receive a message stating that the session has expired and that they need to log in again. If the system supports session saving or restoration, that should also be clearly communicated to avoid confusion. It is also good practice to use idle warnings. These are messages that appear when a session is nearing timeout, asking the user if they would like to remain logged in. This helps prevent frustration from unexpected timeouts, while still enforcing session exploration. For more cyber-related content and books, please check out cyberauthor.me. Also, there are other podcasts on cybersecurity and more at baremetalcyber.com. Another best practice is to ensure that timeout policies are enforced automatically. Users should not be able to bypass or extend timeout settings through browser tricks or by leaving a session open in the background. Automated enforcement through identity and access management tools ensures consistency and reliability. Timeout policies should also be documented clearly in user training and security awareness materials. Users need to understand why they are being logged out after a period of inactivity and how they can avoid losing work or being disrupted. This helps build trust in the system and reduces help desk calls related to session timeout. Organizations should also regularly review their timeout policies and make adjustments based on feedback, new threats, and updated technology. For example, if you introduce a new cloud platform or remote access service, the timeout settings for that system should be carefully reviewed and tested. Now, from an exam perspective, you should be prepared to answer questions about how session management helps prevent attacks like session hijacking, how timeout policies contribute to the principle of least privilege, and what controls are necessary to ensure session security. You may also see scenarios where a system is compromised due to an unattended session. or where a security audit reveals inconsistent session timeout settings across applications. The right answer will usually involve implementing or improving session management and timeout enforcement. The ISC² CISSP exam wants to make sure you understand that access must be actively controlled not only at the beginning of the session, when the user logs in, but throughout the session, and especially when it ends. Session management and timeout policies are part of a broader framework of identity and access management. They connect to authentication, authorization, logging, monitoring, and security auditing. When these elements are all working together, they form a strong, resilient barrier against unauthorized access and user error. Remember that sessions are like doors into your systems. Once someone is inside, you need to watch what they are doing, limit how long they can stay, and make sure the door closes securely behind them. That is what session management and timeout policies are all about. Thanks for joining us for this episode of the Bare Metal Cyber CISSP Prepcast. For more episodes, tools, and study support, visit us at baremetalcyber.com.